So in accordance with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Executive Order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, we are conducting this meeting virtually. The Public Works Commission is conducting this meeting on May 12th, 2021 at 4 p.m. Eastern Time on the Zoom platform in accordance with the town's policy directive and guidelines issued on April 1st, 2020 and amended on May 7th. I ask that all Public Works Commissioners, town staff, and presenters activate their video and mute their microphones unless they have something to say or are participating in committee dialogue. For members of the public, when I open the meeting to public comment, in order to be recognized, please use the raised hand option in Zoom or *9 by phone. If you are recognized, please state your name and address. This meeting is being recorded and will be available for later viewing on the town's website. So I, James Terry, hereby call this meeting to order. All commission votes will be taken by roll call. We will start with an attendance roll call of all commissioners. When I announce your name, please reply. James Terry, present. Andrew Boardman.
Here.
David DeLong.
Present.
Jeff Vassar.
Present.
Casey Winslow. Casey was with us a minute ago, but she had technical problems, so I think she'll be back soon. The first item on our agenda is the review and approval of minutes of our April 14th, 2021 meeting. Does anyone have any comments, or would they like to make a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll move to approve the minutes as written.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, again, we're going to have to do a roll call. All those in favor, James Terry, aye. Andrew Boardman,
Aye.
David DeLong,
Aye.
Jeff Vassar,
Aye.
Casey Winslow. Okay, she still is not here. So I declare the minutes have been approved. The next item that we look at every week is what's upcoming. And our next meeting is June 9th. There are no specific items on the agenda other than the fact that it's like 4 days before town meeting. So we will probably be assigning the Public Works warrant articles for different people. Likely they will be on the consent calendar, but in case they are taken off or there are questions, one of us will have to have some answers. In that regard, last night was the enterprise hearing, and 2 hours into the meeting, if you were to go to it, 2 hours into it is when we get to the Public Works issues. The first one was Melissa taking care of the solid waste and recycling, and then Alan took care of water and sewer. So I found it was very interesting. It was long, and so the reason I gave you the 2 hours is that there were other items before that that might be of interest, but if you don't have the time, you may want to just start at the 2 o'clock time. Okay, I've spent enough time, so it's now 4:05, so that's appropriate. We have scheduled a public hearing on our water sewer rates at this time. So we need a motion to go in to open the public hearing.
I'll make a motion to open the public hearing.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, there is a second. We have to do a roll call vote again. James Terry, aye. Andrew Boardman. David DeLong.
Aye.
Jeff Vassar.
Aye.
Okay, we have the meeting. The public hearing has started. I think I'm going to turn this over to Alan to begin the presentation.
And Jim Casey is now here.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, I don't know what happened. I got bumped and then I couldn't get back in.
Okay, when
It's always something, right?
So Casey, we just had a roll call vote to enter the public rate hearing for water and sewer. Do you approve?
I approve.
Thank you. Alan.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jim. And as Jim sort of mentioned, a long hearing last night. I'm going to recommend, if you want the best presentation for me, let's schedule it for early morning. That's just a word of advice. Maybe 6 a.m. would be preferable to 10 p.m. With that said, I am going to go over a lot of the some of the detail for the commission, acknowledging that we have some new members, and it's kind of helpful to understand how we go about setting our rates and sort of, most importantly, how important they are to ensure that we're providing, steady, reliable, quality service. That's really what we're all about on the water and wastewater side. In order to get to this point, I've had a lot of help from, the Public Works team, John Rogers, Water Sewer Superintendent, Nelson Moy, who is our new management analyst for Water Sewer. Got an introduction to all this, working with Bob Hill and Paul Reinhardt, who is just recently retired, but has had over 24 years of support in developing our budgets, both the general fund as well as enterprise, and greatly appreciate his effort. And a lot of the tools we use now, he helped develop. So just to give him, the credit he deserves on that. I'm going to read out just so as a matter of sort of the procedurally, that you received a packet of information that had a proposed rate schedule, special service fees for adoption by the Public Works Commission, serving as the Water Sewer Commission. This information has been disseminated via the Town Manager's Enterprise Fund budget book, the Financial Committee Enterprise Fund virtual hearing last night, May 11th, 2021, and postings in newspaper of general circulation in Concord and on the town's website. So we've got the notice out. There's a full packet that we're not going to go through every detail, but I do recommend when you have a moment, you can look through the various classifications and some of the more nitty gritty detail. But I'm going to now share my screen and go through. Oh, did I get the right share or not? Can you see it? Okay. So the objectives of water and sewer are, primarily driven by regulations and statutory requirements. Both utilities are fairly heavily regulated, both for quality control issues as well as quantity. They both are major drivers in our need for expanding capacities or developing sources of supply or enhancing treatment, both on the drinking water and wastewater side. It's also to provide a high level of customer service. Again, a constant, steady, 24/7 reliable, quality drinking water, as well as fire protection. And on the wastewater side, a treatment facility that collects everybody's waste. We treat it, we put it into a condition where it can be re-entered into the environment, into the natural and wild and scenic river, the Concord River, which takes a lot of energy and cost associated with that. And we also need to plan for not just today, but future. So a lot of our decisions, especially when we're talking about budgets, are not just where are we this coming, the next year, but where do we stand over, the next, 10, 20 years. The most significant regulatory drivers we have, and you'll hear more about them in different meetings and whatnot, are we've talked a little bit about the Water Management Act. That drives our available source of supply. We're going to be in a permit review this coming year. It may or may not be quick and dirty. It's likely going to require technical services and support from the outside, potential legal support, depending on if we think Concord's interests are being protected and preserved. But in essence, it's the renewal of our Water Management Act permit is kind of front and center. We also have talked about emerging contaminants, PFAS. We've had many conversations about that, and I'll give you a little bit of update on that. Cybersecurity is another, it's a best management practice, but also a regulatory requirement that we follow certain practices to comply and protect our infrastructure. When it comes to customer satisfaction, the town has a fairly regular poll that it does independent of each department and division, and we get the results. I'm sure we're due for one fairly soon, but you can see some historic perspective where, for the most part, our customers, believe the quality of services, they're very satisfied or somewhat satisfied. We're looking at 95% of our customers. So it seems like we're providing the right level of service. On the demand, this is a table that shows variability from year to year over the past 10 years, how our system demands fluctuate. You will note that we had a few years in 2017 to 19 where we were had a significant response, in part to conservation messaging and probably weather dependent as well. This past year was a bit interesting in that we believe with a lot of people staying at home through the pandemic, there was a lot more interest in entertainment outside in their own property. And we think that may have been reflected in sort of an increased demand for the past year. The infrastructure that we operate and maintain is, we've talked about this before, unusual in that we have a number of sources of supply, all with varying qualities and treatment needs. We have a surface water supply, NAGOG, which we know is anticipating to invest significant capital funds over the next few years in a treatment facility. And we also have storage reservoirs that we are, Nursenack, for instance, is where we've deferred some rehabilitation this past fiscal year. It'll be engaged in the fall to, fairly significant refurbishment there. A lot of pipe, over 130 miles of distribution main. That's significant, especially as we talk about needs for repair, replace, refurbish. Our operating expenses are sort of the, what we look at year to year. You'll see from our operating and maintenance, we do take in monies to account for depreciation of our assets. We do operate as an enterprise and sort of best practices. We have a significant contribution from our user and service fees that go to support general fund services. Those are the other town departments that may be the finance department, town manager's office, the accounting. These are services that we benefit from, that rather than having in-house staff, we will provide services, as well as the NRC and planning, for instance, engineering division who provide support. And then you can see the remainder is for our pumping, treatment, distribution system. Most importantly, and not to get bogged into the numbers, it's really the goal for our operating projections is to generally have net income where our revenues, our expenses are offset by our revenues, and the revenues are primarily user fees. And so when we talk about rates, that's where it drives home the need to pay attention to, are we charging enough per unit of water to sustain the routine operating and maintenance needs. And what we do is we have a 10-year pro forma so that, well, we know at a certain rate and a certain assumption on demand, we can project what our revenue will be. We can project our operating expenses generally. And again, this is a plan. We can also project our net income as a result of those. And you'll see, for instance, in 2026, we do go negative, meaning we will be more expenses than revenue for that particular year, but that will be offset by reserve funds that we retain, as well as knowing that it's not a continual downward trend. We do recover, and you'll see that our net revenue goes, or net income goes up. So this is important. The town is trying to advocate and champion 10-year budget planning. We've been doing this for 24 years. We're now just starting to share this sort of information. We shared this last night with the FinCom, just so they can understand where the enterprise sits. Not to get into the details, but basically included and above and beyond our operating and routine operation and maintenance, we put a significant level of investment into replacing assets. And for the most part, you'll see we have a plan of just over $6 million of expenditures that are capital related, which is refurbish or replace critical infrastructure. What's most important is we don't just limit it to 1 year out. We look at a 10-year projection. And what's important here is a couple things. This is millions of dollars, On the y-axis, you'll see our beginning balance or reserve. That's money that we've been collecting and putting aside with a plan, knowing that at some point we're going to need those funds. And $10 million sounds like a lot to have on reserve until you start realizing our capital plans are, upwards of $5 million for, a sustained period of time. And what you can see is the blue is our capital plan. We're looking at, from 22 through 27, somewhere to the tune of $5 million a year, up to 15 million in 2025. What this means, and this plan is based on water quality and treatment. And we've talked about NAGOG being significantly more expensive than originally anticipated because of extended permitting, local and state challenges, as well as litigation for the water rights issues that you're familiar with, as well as the increased costs of everything that was involved, from 5 years ago. We did go to town meeting for borrowing to support the investments in NAGOG, but you'll know that our borrowing, when you can see the debt here, is generally offset from our reserve fund. So again, by having a healthy reserve, the town benefits because our reserve is considered part of the town's assets, and when we get bond rated, they consider anything that the enterprise systems may have in the townwide balance. But when we need it, then we need to draw on it, and we are not going out for significant debt. We're drawing upon our reserve by design. So the next 5 years is all about water quality treatment, and you're going to see the years out. And this is really important. I'm pretty excited about this. This budget, with what we're proposing, and we were, the cut the chase is we're looking at a 10% rate increase for user fees. The reason we're going there is because we know we're going to have the significant investments in treatment that's necessary. We are now preparing ourselves for the years out to replace the distribution system at a rate that is really what the industry says we should be doing. Very few systems and utilities can say they achieved that appropriate balance, but we, with this rate increase, are setting ourselves up so that we're no longer in a position of saying we need to catch up. We'll have actually got to a point, and we can project that we have a stable O&M and capital plan that's sustainable at rates that we understand what they will be. And that's a pretty big, important message, and pretty pleased. I think this is the first year since I've been here, we can say we're getting to that point. And we've been slowly increasing our investments in distribution, but really with this particular challenge on the treatment, knowing that we're going to need to offset some of those expenses with an increased rate, we realize that we might be able to realize the full plan of sustainability in our fiduciary responsibilities. As far as the customer class, 56% of our customers in demand is residential. 24% is commercial, institutional, mixed use. We have some regional facilities, MCI, Emerson Hospital, which make us a little bit unique. We have municipal, and then others. What's important is this balance, at least through the pandemic, allowed us to not really lose too much revenue. I mean, there were communities I'm aware of that were actually really hit hard where they had projected a certain revenue, and with the commercial impact, they saw a significant drop in their demand and revenues, and their operating costs are for the most part pretty much fixed. So there's some challenges out there. I'm pleased to say Concord did not fall into that, did not have that problem. What we did see this year, this is a metric that the state uses. It's residential gallons per day per capita. And this is an allowance per person, per household, of what is considered by the state a reasonable allowance. I'll say EPA nationally uses an allowance of 100 gallons per day per capita. The state of Massachusetts targets 65. That's this line right here. And we had done pretty well over the last few years, getting, below or just at that level. This past year, our residential gallon per day per capita went up significantly. And while we did collect revenue, which was good, this actually presents a little bit of a problem when we renegotiate our Water Management Act permit. It becomes a metric the state looks at to impose certain conservation expectations, demands on the community. And this will likely end up putting a restriction of outdoor irrigation to a mandatory 1 day a week by the state's requirements, not necessarily our desire. Right now, we go into every summer season with a recommendation of best practices of 1 day a week. This year it's different. We are actually mandating it because we've continued from the drought last year, and we have some issues with the intake at NAGOG. I'll talk about a little bit later, but this is important in that it really sort of compromises our internal ability to manage. The state will probably get involved with our conservation program because of that. This, so the commission can see, is an annual curve on demand, and it makes sense where in the winter periods we are averaging about 1.5 million gallons a day. It ramps up in May and then went significantly higher in last June. Again, that was when people were just they were going stir crazy at home. They had been housebound in March, April, May, then let's get out. And so there's a lot of water use. You see, well, the average June was about 2.5. We were up at 3. And that, we can read the tea leaves there. It's not that much of a surprise. This year, we cannot afford to get a high peak in May and June because we have construction going on NAGOG intake. It's not available for supply. So we are reaching out, and we'll be doing so fairly aggressively, explain to people that we are in a mandatory 1 day a week watering. You can do this, but if they ignore or don't comply, we run the risk of having to escalate that to a water ban. And excuse me, if people work with us and we get the message out, we're hoping we won't have to go to a water ban. 1 day a week, we think, is certainly with this season and how it's been, you should be able to sustain your property if you're doing things right. And we will be providing education as well, but just to put that on the radar. This peak summer demand is reflected in our rate schedule. If you read the packet information, you are probably familiar now that we have this. It's an increasing block rate structure seasonally for our residents. And the increasing block rate structure, you can see, goes up significantly from a base allowance, which is 70% of our customers do not exceed that base allowance. And when you exceed that, it generally means you're using it for more outdoor watering than, it's not a bad thing. It just means maybe a larger yard, more, challenging to maintain, but it's generally outdoor water use. So the industry calls it non-essential. I don't necessarily go there because I don't want to put value judgments on what people are doing with their water. But if you hear non-essential, that's the term is it's for outdoor water use, which, varies from indoor use. And then the third step is, you'll see each block rate, you go up to 100% greater for a second step and 150% greater for a third step. So people who are using water in those rates will be spending, potentially thousands of dollars a year for water, and happily. They look at the value of their property, and to them, it's an investment. The challenge to the town is they are part of a collective permit that needs to be managed. We do have a discount rate for needs-based customers that we coordinate with the municipal light plant and the assessors. And we do have, the subscriptions have been going down over the last few years. There was discussion last night at the hearing about, sort of expanding that program, sort of not just on the water side, but, trying to look for people with needs and figuring out ways on their taxes how to help offset some of the escalating costs. But we continue to track that and we'll be, involved. We have a general service rates. This is for the commercial use, and you'll see this is a year-round conservation message where the first step is to try to accommodate smaller businesses and companies and companies and businesses that are not water intensive, small offices and shops. And when you start using lots of volumes of water, we really try to incentivize you looking at your processes and systems to try and reduce water. And so there's an incentive in the second step, to incentivize conservation in processes that may be more complicated that we can get involved with, but incentivize the businesses to look at their internal processes to say, how can we save, our operating costs? So when we did a survey of the opinion of water service price, you'll see most people, fell into considering it was reasonably priced. There are some people who believe it's a good bargain, and those who are, believe it's excessively priced, for the most part, are likely those who are getting the second, third tier impact. And to some, it modifies their behavior, and to others, they just would prefer not to pay so much. So I think over time, we're looking at, not so much price, but we may be looking at our step structure to realign that to be a little bit more consistent with the regulations and policies in the Commonwealth. But again, excuse me, the takeaway is across the board a 10% increase in the rates from last year. All of those increases are going to be reflected in our revenue back here, which again, we extend out as to the goal is we go up 10% this year. This is not an annual kind of increase. This is significant, but it's driven again, primarily for the treatment costs. And then we're going to have the distribution replacement. And we hope that if we can get through this year, we'll better identify the real cost. We'll get closer to real cost, and we'll be able to bring any rate increase down to, our target's always been 3 to 5%. And we think we may be able to achieve that, going into the future. That's basically what this revenue table is based on, sort of a lesser. Right now, it's at 5% per year. We're hoping we'll be able to reduce that down once we get more actual costs. So that is the water. I will quickly go to the sewer. I'm not going to go through all the details. I gave you some background. The sewer, 30% of the town is sewered. 95% of the town receives municipal water. So it's not the entire community. We have similar significant assets, primarily the wastewater treatment plant. That's our largest single asset. Excuse me, I'm enjoying some of Concord's finest, or needing it. Our operating expense, again, 30% of our expenses go to the contract management at the wastewater treatment plant. That's a third-party vendor. We also have contributions to the general fund, just like the water, and we significant 35% depreciation. Again, best practices as an enterprise. Here is our story on the revenue and expenses and net income. You can see that we generally have more revenue than expense projected. You never see the net income go negative. What's important is we are putting money aside into our reserve, which is very important because when you see our capital plan, well, it's significantly less than what we see for water right now. It's still not insignificant, up to $1.5 million of investments based on our wastewater stations, our collection system. Significant level of effort will be done in planning as we look at integrated water resource planning to try and offset hard costs at the wastewater treatment plant. And we always set aside significant money for infiltration. That's sealing up the pipes. We don't so much replace them like the water distribution, but we actually seal those so we don't have to rip up the road. Some of our sewer pipes are 20 feet deep, and excavating in the more populated area of town at 20-foot depth is not economical. So we do liners and things like that. Capital plan in the sewer, what you'll see is, we're robust with our surplus. What you'll note is there is no debt plan. We're not planning over the next 10 years to borrow anything. But what we anticipate is where our capital investments are fairly modest, these years out are placeholders. And what we have them is the last major overhaul we did at our wastewater treatment plant was 2007 to the tune of about $13.5 million. It's likely in 20 years, and we're going to be reaching that in 2027, we'll be looking at significant investments at the wastewater treatment plant, major upgrades. So we are anticipating that. We don't have that together. We do have a contract operations or new contract that we've been looking at this fall, and we're looking for whoever gets the award will have a needs assessment component when they get in with their new team to evaluate the condition of the facilities and start helping us identify what are our short-term and long-term needs, knowing that we're likely going to have significant investments in the late 2020s at the treatment plant, with a goal of not having to go out and borrow, for that. The adjustments presently for the sewer, we're only proposing a 2% increase on the sewer user fees. I will say the cost for sewer services, I think average cost is somewhere around $750 a year per resident versus somewhere $550 a year for water. So sewer has always been more of a cost, but it's a smaller system. The treatment process is very complex, and a smaller pool of people to share the burden. That's just part of the nature of it, the design. But again, it's self-supporting, it's enterprise, it doesn't collect any funds or from taxes. And you can see the proposed increase for both residents and commercial. I'll also note that residential sewer customers are charged based on the winter demand. And I'll go back up just quickly. We only have 1 meter that goes into a house, and people are concerned when they're using water outdoors in the summer. Well, they're not using sewer service. It's going outside. So what we do is we use these off-peak monthly reads to prorate what their actual indoor water use is. And that's the basis of how we will assess a sewer fee. And that prevents a lot of challenges. It's very unique. I think it's very fair. Concord's one of the few, systems who actually do this. It does require a lot of work administratively, but it's a fair way of offsetting the challenges of customers who might want a second meter for their outdoor irrigation or other uses, which brings about a whole bunch of complexities that we've opted to say, if we use the winter demand as a basis of assessing a fee, it's the fairest way to sort of establish our sewer, a cost of sewer. This is the fee schedule that was posted in the Journal and online. And I believe that's basically, I'm not sure, yeah, that's the end of the formal presentation. So I'm all ears for questions. You've got your packet of information you may have read through. And included is the specific schedule of rates with details as far as each class and what it means. And we need your vote to sort of approve the increases we're proposing. But anything on the I can take it off to stop, stop sharing and can bring that back up. But does anybody have questions on our cost of service and rates?
Andrew.
Yeah, I just had a question, and this was related to the general service, what is this, W213? the second step up rate is different than the residential rate. And I'm just curious how that number came about, because the first rate's the same and then it doesn't step up as much or at the same, but or at the same consumption rate. So I just didn't know where that came from and what the justification was.
Correct. So I think when we first went through this increasing block rate structure, again, it was probably over 20 years ago, we try to keep the residential and commercial rates fair. There are systems in communities where, the commercial, companies are really sort of supporting residential service, and we try to make sure that it was equitable. And, again, if you look at the profile of Concord, most of our customers are residential. With the seasonal demand for small businesses, they really don't have significant properties. These are small businesses that sort of hit that first step. They're going to be more efficient anyway. It's the larger companies that go into that second step that are likely going to have seasonal increases, but it's modest in comparison to their actual process needs based on the size and scale of their facility. So what you'll notice is the second step for commercial is not as high. I think it might be a little higher than the second step in residential, but not as high as a third step. It just sort of fits that in between, but it's really to account for, it's not the same kind of profile that a resident would have. And I will say it's difficult to get a standard business water use consumption profile because they're all a little bit different. Emerson Hospital is different than Nero, and that kind of thing.
And I noticed there was a second meter thing which seemed entirely geared towards outdoor irrigation for a business. Is that common, where if they have larger irrigation systems, they have a separate meter which is going to cover that anyway?
They can do that. And another nuance for the second meter is for construction and those sorts of things that would require water use that wouldn't be a residence, it wouldn't be sort of business, it's temporary in nature as well.
There are other questions from the commissioners. Jeff?
Yeah, Alan, thank you for the overview. I think it might have been slide 12 where you showed kind of the state target for residential water use at 65 and how we had done last year. I was just wondering, maybe I missed it. I was wondering if we did did we do a similar analysis for the other categories? Because I would assume they dropped. Well, I shouldn't make any assumption here. So it might be that they dropped lower and obviously more people were home and less people at work, but do we not do that analysis because the state doesn't ask for that number from us?
Yeah, that is not a metric that we would measure. And you see, we've been doing this for years because this is a standard. There's two. There is this residential gallon per day per capita, and then there is water loss. That's another one that the state considers, where you have losses through your system, leaky pipes and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And they use a 10% loss as a trigger of, if you're greater than 10%, you're inefficient, and they have you do certain things to try and identify where you might be losing the water and how you can correct it. We have historically been at or below 10%. And we do every year, we do a leak detection of our entire system, 50% of the system each year. So every 2 years we go and we inspect, at least every pipe in the system, including the hydrants. And sometimes we can pick up leaky services as well. Mm-hmm. So, but no, I don't have that that assessment on the commercial side because of that reason.
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other commissioner questions? Okay, Alan,
I'm sorry. So just to follow up on that, I thought that last June was very interesting in that it went up, and I think it's a pretty good assumption that, people were coming out after COVID. I just wonder about this June, because I feel like a lot of people are putting in pools this year. And I don't know how that's going to affect it, but I wouldn't think it would be a positive, running in the right direction anyway.
Yeah, it could be, it's a pressure. And as I said, we are presently, it's been a very accommodating May. We've had nice rainfalls and cool temperatures. I've been here where April seems like it's midsummer, in the past, and we had demands increase significantly. So we want to be careful when we get our message out loud and clear that 1 day a week is appropriate, because generally what we see is it takes a good 48 hours to get the message out, and it takes a good 48 hours to get a response. And, we want to build that in. And ideally, until we have the intake line replaced, and we're probably looking at, early June at best, that's probably what we're looking at to activate at this point, assuming there's no delays or anything like that. We just want to be ready to get the message out that 1 day a week should be sufficient. And we are a little bit beholden to Mother Nature. But as far as pools and things like that, yeah, when we go into our, I will, Casey, because you mentioned that, I do have that slide. I think it's worth sharing as a reminder to the commission that our seasonal demand management plan, I think I had it here. This is what it looks like. And basically, this is, seasonal demands, because during the summer is when we have our peak demands. We always have best practices, which is 1 day a week or 1 inch of water, depending, and if it's raining and you supplement, great. If it rains, you get 1 inch, you should be okay. That's best practices. We only educate, not regulate here. We get to a restriction, which is where we are presently. This is, we both educate and regulate and take enforcement for people who do not follow. And the enforcement is a real challenge because we're not really well suited to be water cops. We have some tools where we do some early morning rounds to inspect. The 1 day a week allowance we do, it's the same day as your trash collection. We try to keep it consistent so people know what day a week can I water, because otherwise it'd be like herding cats as far as enforcement. If they decided what day, we couldn't manage that. So we say you can water on the day that trash is collected. And if we happen to do a surveillance early AM and we find an irrigation system operable on a day of week where it shouldn't be, we provide notice. It's a warning. It'll be a letter or door hanger to the homeowner. And if we see it again, that's where we have the ability to assess a $50 fee or penalty. And really, we're trying to it's a collective need to be cooperative so we don't run out of water and have fire protection issues. So we're hoping the message, people are generally responsive. I will tell you, in the past, this was last year, you can see this is the demand of water from a 1.5 million back in May. You can see it increasing. And what you can see is the red line is temperature. As the temperatures go up, down below you can see precipitation down here. And it's not uncommon to see this slow escalation of demand going up over 3.5 to close to 4 million gallons a day. And that started to stress our system. So we went from messaging, these green stars are when we started active messaging, news and notice, maybe signboards. When we got to this point, we really need to control the demand. And that's when we went to the enforceable 1 day a week with messaging. And what you'll see is the demand response was significant. And that's impressive. So majority of Concordians responded, and that was very impressive. And then you see a creep going up, week after week, a little bit. We reinforced the message again. We saw another drop, but this is a very different pattern than up here. And so, for the most part, the education is really what we look for, not the fines or violations, but we do have the tools and resources if need be to impose them. So, Casey, is that helpful?
Yes, thank you.
Can I ask a question?
David,
As the novice new commissioner, I'll be the troublesome one, and also naive. So you've just ruined my evening, Alan. I have to go upstairs now and tell my wife that those shrubs she was planning to buy this spring, and I'm asking this as a question, basically, and plant, probably from New England nurseries, she should forget those this year. Is that right? I mean,
No, let me go back to I'm going to go back here and go back to the actual plan. And I recommend everybody who's watching this, we do have this on the website. So you can actually see the seasonal demand management plan. But when you're talking about flower bed, shrubs, trees, it's okay.
oh, really?
Look at that.
Oh.
That
Oh,
isn't the problem. It's the lawns that are the challenge.
we don't water a lawn.
You are a ideal commissioner.
Seriously, I've learned that lesson. Oh, good. Okay, so we can water a few new shrubs.
Yeah, that's yeah. We are. This isn't to be punitive.
Okay.
We're trying to find where's the water not needed, and it is the lush green grass, which we appreciate people want, but it really isn't something that works in New England when you have water, issues.
Okay. All right.
So did I just help you there?
Yeah, you did. You saved my, I don't want to say saved my marriage, but you saved my, kept my wife happy. And okay,
Any other questions or comments?
thank you.
So I just out of curiosity, so I would think other residential communities like Concord had the same issues in, last late May, early June, everybody should have been elevated at the same time, correct?
It's interesting. Big story there is there's a lot of attention on droughts and declarations in the state. And it's interesting that a lot of watershed groups are pressing for changes, and there's a new drought management plan statewide, and there's more and more teeth in it to have all communities abide by the same restrictions. Not every system is the same. MWRA, for instance, would argue that they have a reservoir that has 3 or 4 or 5 years of storage. So independent of any drought, they are not seeing it reflected in their reserve. They have it available. And you may see a challenge for Concord where we have restrictions, Bedford on MWRA doesn't, or they're not enforced the same way. So regrettably, or for what it's worth, every system is not the same. And what they need to do, for instance, right now, our messaging is going to be driven primarily by infrastructure improvements at NAGOG for the next month, not a drought. The state just said the drought is over in this region based on the recent recharge, but the way they have it set and triggered, we could go back to a drought pretty quickly. So they're going to go up and down, every season. But for us, our interest is coming out of the gate, just kind of hold your horses, because we need to get the intake done so we can provide you with the water. And we do believe, David, if it's for shrubs and that sort of thing, that's not what causes that real spike. It's the automated irrigation systems going every day or every other day, which just, are killers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Ellen, I've got a couple of questions. The rates are based on cubic feet instead of gallons. Why is that?
Some people would say to confuse you, but that's not why. Bob Hill, do you want to step in? Because you're sort of the guy who's dealing a lot with our NISC. That's our meter and billing software. Bob Hill, you there? Yeah,
I'm here, Alan.
You want to answer that question?
Unfortunately, there isn't a really good answer other than cubic feet seems to have been an industry standard. It initially was, metered in units of 100 cubic feet. So for the meter dial to spin around, you had use 748 gallons. Now we install cubic foot meters. There are a handful of systems out there that bill in gallons, but that would require at this point a whole scale change in our meters and everything else because they're calibrated, for cubic feet, and we would be forever converting all of our statistics for reporting and everything else back to cubic feet because that's the way the regulatory agencies look at a lot of this stuff.
Okay, so I assumed that my meter was in gallons, but it's not. It's in cubic feet.
It's in cubic feet.
Okay, that's
But your
good.
bill, we do convert it on your bill, so you can see
Right.
the gallons. Yeah.
Yeah, and then as moving forward, as we work towards improving the granular detail that's available to customers through the customer portal and that sort of thing, you should be able to choose, how do I want to see my usage graphed in gallons or in cubic feet? So, we will get to that point without having to invest in major capital expenditures.
Thank you. Alan, in the report you provided, where you talked about the lead water service line replacement, can you give us a little bit of information as to how you identify customers that have that issue, or how they identify it to you that they have lead pipes?
Sure, and it does go back actually to that first slide of the regulatory compliance. So it's a great program we have where we realized EPA was getting more aggressive with, trying to get literally identify lead service lines. We're all familiar with what happened with Flint, Michigan. There were some real challenges with changes in water quality, which resulted in changes in the chemistry of the water that was served to the customers, and identified a huge challenge with lead leaching from pipes. So we have a database system. It's not perfect. We have records of every service line in town, and we've maintained these over decades. So we have service, tie cards or records that date, over 100 years. Most services have a life expectancy. These are the copper lines for the most part of about 50 to 75 years before they leak. Some may last longer, but we actually have records of replacements that may happen at a residence. When we saw that the service was upgraded or replaced. We know there's some areas we are uncertain about. And if someone's interested and calls to find out what their service line is, we'll look at the data we have. We may investigate inside the house and see what's coming in through the basement, to help us identify if our records aren't great. Or if need be, we'll do a test dig to find it and see if we can confirm. But we've reached out to a lot of customers that we know of who have lead service lines to inform them of the program. And basically, the program we put in place with the commission's vote was a rate where we wanted to incentivize replacement of private services. We want to use the enterprise, our own in-house resources, the personnel and equipment, but we didn't want to have a significant rate. We want to make it at least cover the cost for the labor and material, but not looking for profit. And so we came with a range of $750 to $1,500 that we could do that job, each site being a little bit, different. And so we use the data, we use an interest from someone who contacts us, we look at our records, and we do some investigation of the site if need be to determine, are they eligible and is it something we can provide. So that's basically the lead service line replacement program, which is being really pushed now at the federal level through the lead and copper rule. They're looking for communities to adopt these sorts of programs. We've been doing it for a few years now, and there's even some incentives they're starting to look at, and you'll hear through the federal funding of targeting monies to go towards lead service line replacements. And that may be something we can look at depending on what happens.
Thank you. One final question. The municipal service rate is slightly less than the residential and the commercial rate. Is there a historical reason for that?
The municipal, which,
water rate.
Oh, yeah, obviously, yeah, thank you. Yeah, okay.
I'm sorry.
No, you're right, you're correct. The reason for that is when we first went through this 3-tier rate and looking at fairness, we realized that one, with the municipal, we are trying to be fair. They provide our municipal customers, our customers we can reach out to instantaneously to say, we have a water challenge. You need to restrict water use. They will work with us. There's not a lot of coercion. We just need to talk with them, inform them there's this need, and that ability to interrupt service quickly and at our convenience has value. And so that value is realized in the fact that they get a little lower rate of, for the user fees. As when you look at our portfolio, there's not a lot of commercial, municipal use per se. And you look at the school, for instance, which are municipal customers, they don't operate so much in the summer. So their demand is kind of offset. They do kind of the more of the non-seasonal demand than where we're trying to get reductions.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from the commissioners? Anna, are there any questions or comments from the audience?
I don't see any.
Rod?
Oh,
Thank you, Jim. Alan, just a quick question. That
Can you identify yourself, please?
oh, sorry, Rod Rydell, 324 Main Street.
Thank you.
Alan, just a follow-up question on the month last year in 2020 that went over the state guideline. How do we compare with other municipalities? Was this a phenomenon that occurred statewide? And could that be used as an argument not to have the state impose particular restrictions on our town?
It's a great question, and one that I'm having conversations with, other utilities as we speak about this. And it is an argument that we're posing because we do think it was an anomaly. And it remains to be seen if the state's willing to, accommodate that. I know they're reissuing permits. I've seen a few lately. I don't know how the 2020 factored into that, but that's on our radar for a discussion point. And I will say that it wasn't just the month. Last year, June was an excessive month, but the rate, the per capita rate is based on an annual. And sure, that 1 month in June probably increased it, but probably there was more demand through the rest of the summer too. But no, I think it's a very good point. It's certainly an anomaly. And I was involved when they were setting these policies up on a steering committee and made the case that we should be looking at rolling averages, not a 1 year. The regulators like the 1 year because it allowed a hook, that they could grab, and they proceed. They didn't take my recommendation, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other public comments? So seeing none, is there a commissioner willing to make a motion to close the rate hearing? Casey?
I move to approve the water rate schedules and also the sewer rate schedules as presented and described in the fiscal year 2022. Water and sewer rate schedules memo dated May 5th, 2021, prepared by Water Sewer Management Analyst and issued by Public Works Director.
For that, I move to close the public hearing.
Thank you. Yes. So is there a second to Andrew's motion?
Second to close the hearing. or-
Thank you. On a roll call vote to close the public hearing. James Terry, aye. Andrew Boardman,
Aye.
David DeLong,
Aye.
Casey Winslow,
Aye.
Jeff Vassar.
Aye.
Okay, thank you very much. Now there's a second. Is there a second to Casey?
I
Winslow?
second Casey's motion.
Thank you very much. Is there any discussion on that motion? Okay, we will have a roll call vote on the motion that in fact approves the recommended water and sewer rate changes. James Terry, aye. Andrew Boardman,
Aye.
David DeLong,
Aye.
Casey Winslow,
Aye.
Jeff Vassar.
Aye.
Thank you very much. The next item on our agenda is to hear about a planning update, the two-family and additional dwelling unit warrant article. So Alan, I think I saw Marcia was there a little while ago.
She's
That's
back.
right.
There she is.
And I'm here. Yes. Good evening. It's fascinating information that Alan presents, isn't it, though?
Marcia was ready to give this hers a half hour ago, right?
Yeah, we put lots of people to
Oh,
sleep.
no. I learned a lot, and I appreciate the detail that is provided to you. And I'm here to talk about a little bit about the Planning Board's warrant article under Article 38 for this year's town meeting that talks to amending and increasing housing in resident C districts. And that has the potential for impacting both water and sewer because our resident C district is the most densely developed. It's the area that is served by town sewer and town water. And there's a rationale and thinking behind that. And so I'm here to talk a little bit about that, as well as to bring to your attention some conversation that's going on with regard to adding residential component to the Thorough Business District. So if you can, Alan has looked forward. I'm going to be looking back to 2018 with the adoption of the Envision Concord plan. That one of the goals of that plan, it talks about encouraging renovating existing housing and increasing the housing stock available, the opportunities that are available for people. One of the recommendations was to amend the two-family or the additional dwelling unit bylaw, which is what Article 38 is all about. But before the planning board actually got to this stage where they're proposing changes, they did a step back to say, well, what is the impact of all of this? And so they looked at what our current additional dwelling units are. In 2019, there were only 179 out of the over 7,000 housing units that are out in the town of Concord that are additional dwelling units where people are renting them or they created them for members of their household. So they did a survey of those 179 people, and we had a 20% response. That's only 36 people responding. But we found that over 50% of those units were only one person or were members of a household. And I've got some other details about that. So they said they felt that there would not be a significant increase or a major jump in the number of housing units if they were to propose the language that is in the Article 38. And that the objectives there, Anna, you have the presentation if you wanted to, or I can show it. But
for running, or I can sort of bring it up. What would you prefer?
Well, it would be easier if you can bring it up and then I'll just talk to it, if that's okay.
Yep.
This is what's going to be presented to town meeting. It will be on the planning board's agenda tomorrow night, so you're welcome to attend. It's one of several articles, but Article 30, if you next slide, please. And this is what the specifics are to grant a special permit for construction of a new two-family or alteration of an existing single family in a two-family dwelling. And also to allow a reduction in parking requirements, which is something you don't need to worry about. But next slide is the one that's most important here. The desire is to produce additional housing units that match our future needs, to provide less expensive housing without subsidizing them, increasing density near shopping, transit, and cultural resources, which are the districts that follow where our sewers are located, and to maintain the neighborhood character with respect to the dimensional requirements of a lot and limiting the potential disruption to a lot. So let me see if there's anything else. The next slide shows a little bit of what they were looking at. And we do have a lot of two families in the resident C district, which follows Route 62 and the two village centers primarily. We noticed they counted and figured out, okay, there's 66 in the resident C, which includes those housing units that were converted to condominium. And then of those, there's only 6% out of all of our housing that is in the Residence C district. So 1,000 out of the 7,000 plus. Next slide. And this shows where those districts are: Concord Center, Thorough Depot area. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, and this is West Concord, in the area of Central Street, Losbrook Road area, and along Route 62. Next slide, please. So previously we had we had to have the owner of the house had to live in the house. There were sale restrictions, so converting to we don't have that requirement. We allow absentee ownership. We are allowing the conversion of a two-family into a condominium. It's currently allowed. It's a question of ownership pattern. It's not something that we zone. For this bylaw, the two units must be part of the same structure. They must conform to the setbacks, which for Residence C are 20 feet from the front property line, 15 feet from the side yard lines, and either 30 feet or the lesser of the lot depth, whichever is less. So if your lot is only 100 feet deep, you can have a 25-foot setback in the rear yard. We're suggesting a reduction in the number of parking spaces, and the property is limited by our floor area ratio and the setbacks. So that you can't eat the whole lot, but you do have to provide those setbacks. And the special permit will be permanent and will be transferable. Previously, if you were to sell your house with an additional dwelling unit, the new owner had to go back and get a special permit for that additional dwelling unit. So that's sort of the nutshell of what's proposed. And next slide will it does add the density near the village centers, but in a way that we hope will have less impact. Many of the two families that are in town were built previously in the residency district. We hope that the dimensional regulations will keep it to scale, and that we don't have to create a new overlay zoning district, which Jim Terry, having been on the planning board, might remember how painful it is to have to go to town meeting and create new zoning. So that's some of the rationale behind why this at this point in time. So I think you can stop sharing the screen, Alan. So if there are questions about the two family further.
So Casey. Hi, Marcia.
Hi.
How are you?
I am well. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thanks. So they could be rentals, correct?
Yes, yes.
Two rentals. So, and the owner doesn't have to occupy. So it could be, you could convert your property to two separate units that are both rental properties.
Right.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Jeff, go ahead.
Thank you. I think this is great, Marcia. I know a number of communities are looking into this. I'm glad a number of communities are considering this, including Concord. So I am a supporter of this, and maybe down the road we can look at maybe allowing this in other parts of town too. But I know in working with other communities, one of the concerns is, I'll call it the Airbnb potential. And I know some other communities are looking at zoning language that it will allow this, but there's some specific clauses that say these cannot be for short-term rentals or some such language. Is that part of what we're considering, or can that still be considered?
It's not part of this particular bylaw. It has been a question raised previously, and the way that we have addressed it so far, it's not an allowed use. There is a provision in our zoning that allows people to convert their properties to bed and breakfast. So if you wanted to do an Airbnb, you could go get a special permit to use your house as an Airbnb through that process. And so when it is identified and followed up, if we find it on, if we hear a complaint, the building commissioner will look into that. We'll see where is it advertised. And we'll contact the owner to say, here are your options. You can stop doing what you're doing, or you can seek the special permit to operate a bed and breakfast. And we've had some people who have taken that step to do it. There's a public hearing involved, so the neighborhood is informed. And that's how we are addressing it currently. We have not had a high demand yet, but with COVID, it may have changed the way we operate.
Great, thank you.
Masha, what about the parking? Have you gotten a lot of feedback on that? Like in terms of like, have you gotten pushback from the neighbors?
Not yet. As in our research, as I said, over 50% of those 60 plus units that we looked at were one occupant in the additional dwelling unit. So we're not seeing a high demand, and I think that it's required, but it can be waived if you can demonstrate, well, this is only a 1-bedroom or a studio space that we've created in our additional dwelling unit. Or if it's a 2-family, I don't know that we would necessarily waive it unless it were in close proximity to the commuter train station.
So you'd have to have a special permit to have less than 2, or no?
Let me see. I just give me a minute
Sure,
here.
no problem.
The special permit would address that issue.
I see. When you
So
go through
if
that
you are
process.
talking about a 2-family, they would probably require at least 2 spaces per each unit, unless there were some way that you could demonstrate that you're only creating a 1-bedroom unit for each.
Yeah, because I would think that would have something to do with the size of the unit.
Correct.
Right, so they'll look at that. Okay, thank you.
Dave,
Can you just sort of 2 questions? One is the area C, I'm sorry, I missed it at the beginning. This is not town-wide, is that correct? It's only
That
for
is
certain neighborhoods, and why is that?
Okay. The town of Concord has 4 different residential zones. They vary in size from as small as 10,000 square feet per lot, 20, 40, and 80,000 square feet per lot. The smaller zones are located along what I would call the Route 62 corridor. They are around Concord Center and West Concord. And this is where development occurred most densely back at the when Concord first was created. So 1928, when zoning was first adopted in the town of Concord, the planners at that point in time, or those who are involved in planning for the town, looked at the pattern of development and created various districts for housing. They, at that time, it was general residence and single family residence. The general residence districts were around the centers of town. And that's how it all started. When the wastewater treatment system was developed, it was meant to serve those village centers, because that's where the greatest need was required.
But why not apply this to the whole town?
Because of the impact, as you go out from the centers, there's less opportunity for transportation and for walking into the centers of town. The services are located in the centers. You've got the commuter rail in each of those central districts. And so it's trying to minimize impact on the overall infrastructure and services of the community while providing that additional housing that is greatly needed.
Yes. I know how great, I agree with Jeff. This is really important. I'm just curious as to why
There
I
was
can't.
also an emphasis in the strategic plan and backfill, in the idea of adding more density into the town centers as opposed to developing more raw land for more houses.
Right.
Okay.
It's a more green concept, if you will. It doesn't take away the green fields, the natural resources that support. I look at the whole community. I mean, I wouldn't want everything. The larger lots are to accommodate on-site septic systems, and so it's a little more challenging to create that kind of density on a larger outside of the village centers.
Okay. Thank you.
So Alan, with 2 units in a property, what are we are going to do with water meters and things like that?
Yeah, so the implication, again, to share with the Public Works Commission is we're a part of the town. We have talked about wastewater constraints, and how we manage large new development and review it. In this particular case, infill was an assumption that goes into our planning for wastewater. Limited infill. So this is a change to some of the original planning assumptions. So we want to make sure that we're aware of this change, so there isn't a surprise. With that said, the infrastructure, so capacity is one issue. That's an overarching awareness. And we know we operate at some risk, but we've been mitigating that for years. And we are not expanding our sewer areas to areas that we've identified as needs. We don't have a plan to. There's been no, to date, real driver to do so as far as economically or interest. But we are now allowing capacity to be spent on infill, especially when it's in the town's best interest. And this is one of those things that town meeting will determine, is this in the town's best interest? Then we get to the infrastructure, and that's where on the management of customer accounts, everybody should understand that water, sewer customers are owners of property. We don't, like the light plant can have renters, have their own accounts. We can't. All of our customers are owners, whether we have 1 or 2 meters. We actually have, you saw a 2-family rate structure, that was part of the packet. So we understand 2 families different than a single family. So there's a larger allowance for base use without a conservation driver. And so the accounts are something we'll manage. We have the mechanism to do that pretty reasonably with the owner of the property. The service configuration may be an issue where we need to look at the water and wastewater lines and make sure that they can function to some degree independently. And that's something what we look at, especially units. Marcia didn't talk much about sort of the separate accessory, dwelling units. How, if at all, does that factor in? Because that is one area we find, and the commission has heard from, owners who are frustrated with the cost to separate their utilities. They never factor that in. It's convenient to go to from a garage or barn to an accessory dwelling unit, but they don't look at all the infrastructure needs, and they want to do something that's quick and dirty and cheap, but not necessarily complies with our standards. So that's something which we have to manage. But Marcia, how does the separate accessory dwelling unit factor in, if at all?
It doesn't for this article. It does apply for those units that, if you have an accessory structure or a barn or carriage house on your property, that structure has to predate 1928. It has to be in existence in 1928 or earlier in order to even be eligible for a special permit to convert that unit into an additional dwelling unit. So you're not going to have any additional units at this point in time come online. Before that change happens, again, the planning board will look at what's the potential, what do we have out there, what's the desire, and we'll go through the same discussion. And I think, Alan, you and I will have that conversation before the article goes to the planning board or before they take it to the town meeting. So that's a separate issue entirely and not part of this article. I'd like to quickly, if we can, touch on the Thorough Business District if now is a good time as well.
Marcia, I got to be complete answer to Jim. I just want to know the accessory independent dwelling. Jim, if someone were interested in having 2 services because of convenience, where they want 2 meters because it's a rental and whatever it may be, we do not allow 2 meters with 1 service. So we can accommodate it, but the requirement would be for those independent units, they would have to put in separate utilities, a separate water line, specifically with a separate meter that can then be managed and operated. So if a unit is not for non-payment, we can literally do a shut off. Or if there's a service problem, we can do a shut off out on the street. So that's one of the implications that it could have, but it can be accommodated. It's just an expense people should be aware of if they wanted that separate meter that the town was going to actually manage.
All right, that's helpful. So it looks like the owner is responsible for figuring out who pays how much of the bill, but the total bill is what the water department cares about.
Mhm, correct.
All right, Marcia, go ahead.
And again, I don't know, Alan, do you have that ready to go by any chance?
Let me see. This is
what's online right now.
okay, let me pull that up, see if I can do that.
It's referred to in the Word document, Alan.
All right, yeah, I can bring that up. Hold on one second.
Okay, thank you.
This is good. I'm going to get my master's in Zoom.
We're all trying to do that. And if you could move forward to the fourth slide, please. This is the housing choice legislation was passed in 2020. And out of that legislation, it gives a community the opportunity to have a simple majority vote of town meeting to change your zoning instead of what we currently have, which is a 2/3 supermajority for those uses that particularly multifamily and mixed use development in eligible locations. And then, we have certain things that we have to do, but then there's the requirement that in MBTA communities that we have at least one zoning district of reasonable size in which multifamily housing is permitted as of right and meets the other requirements of the statute. Next slide, Alan. So we were asking back in 2019, actually out of the comprehensive long range plan of 2018, the planning board engaged our regional planning agency, MAPC, the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, to help us think about the thorough business district because we felt there was a lot of potential at that location. And we began to look at this multifamily issue before this legislation was even passed. So we said, well, look, if we're going to promote multi-uses or mixed use types of development, would it satisfy that multifamily requirement? And we're waiting. We don't know yet, but the Department of Housing and Community Development is thinking about the regulations that go around this requirement that MBTA communities have such zoning. And they're looking at new 48 definitions of multifamily or multi-use buildings where it has to be residential and non-residential, and what are those other uses looking like. And so we're thinking carefully about what does this mean for the thorough business district. Alan, if you could move down, next one. Yes, that one. So the one site that the planning board really focused in on was if we were to look at the Crosby's Market site, what might housing look like and what's the level of housing that we might see there? And they felt that, okay, if we do 2 or 3 story structures, we might be able to add an additional 63 units of housing. And then they started playing with percentages of what would be affordable, what might not. But this is an area that is served by town sewer. And so before we go into this actual zoning and bringing it to town meeting, we're going to have to sort of evaluate what does this mean for the community and how might it impact our sewer and water services. We've done some preliminary conversations, Alan and I, about would we go to town meeting to seek support for that, because the cost of extending sewers or expanding your sewer capacity is sometimes viewed as prohibitive or doesn't really support affordable housing goals. So would there be a town meeting authorization to help fund that to keep that more affordable for redevelopment if we were looking at affordable housing? There are grant programs. The Mass Works program might look at ways of we could seek some additional funding or input that might help with that, how to expand capacity at the wastewater treatment plant. These are all part of the conversation as we move forward. But I wanted you to be aware that we're looking at what the state has required of us now. What can we do? I think if you look at West Concord and the 70 units that were created as part of Brookside, which is again a combined or a mixed use commercial and residential development, we're envisioning something comparable for the Thorough business area. So I think we have met the requirement in West Concord already. We were being a little proactive. I think the redevelopment of the Wilson lumber site that has housing and commercial that was developed right behind the Thorough Depot, Chang'an Restaurant, Fiorello's are examples of, not Fiorello's, it's another wonderful Italian place, but those are the types of uses that we are looking at when we talk about mixed use. And when back in 2004 and the evaluation in 2007, we talked about these types of redevelopment activities that might take place over time and how do we address them as a community. And I think there's some conversation about that and how we establish the rates and then how do we make it happen is going to be the ongoing conversation. So this is just for your information. It's nothing that we're moving forward with at this point in time, but it's part of the conversation. Thank you, Alan.
Thank you, Marcia. That was interesting. So that's something we will certainly be thinking about over the next year as we hear more from the planning board.
Okay.
And from Alan. So are there any more questions or comments from the board members regarding this warrant article? Anna, are there any questions or comments from the general public?
I do not see any.
Thank you. Let's move on to our next agenda item. Public Works Commission reorganization. It is time, every May is about the time when we pick new officers for the coming year. And I think right now we want to nominate and elect the chair and vice chair for next year. I'm looking for any nominations for chair. Casey Winslow.
I nominate Jeff Vassar for Public Works Chair for the next.
Is there a second for that nomination?
I second.
Thank you, David. Are there any further nominations for chair? Seeing none, let me see if there probably needs to be a special motion here. Okay, well,
Yes, we do ask that the commissioner move and that there's a second and then a roll call vote, please.
a roll call vote. Thank you, Anna. So roll call vote. James Terry, aye. Andrew Boardman. David DeLong.
Aye.
Casey Winslow.
Aye.
Jeff Vassar.
Thank you, Casey, and I.
Okay. We now have nominations for our vice chair. Casey, do I see a nomination from you?
On mute.
Hear me? Oh, sorry. I nominate David DeLong for Vice Chair for the next fiscal year.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you. Roll call vote. All those in favor for David DeLong as vice chair for next year. James Terry, aye. Andrew Boardman.
Aye.
David DeLong.
I'm abstaining.
Casey Winslow.
All right.
Aye.
I don't
Jeff
know what
Vassar.
else.
Aye.
So we obviously take care of these elections very, very seriously. I think Jeff and David, you've only been on the board for a year. Andrew is going off the board as of next month. And so Casey and I are certainly willing to assist you guys in whatever needs you will have, but I think that our boards will be moving forward with quite dispatch. Next, Alan, I think we have the director's report.
Those guys are quick studies.
Yeah, right.
They're quick studies.
We only get quality commissioners, so we can't lose, and staff is here to help. So in any event, yeah, so we will go to the opportunity to sort of do the round robin with our various division heads and program managers. We'll start off with Melissa Simoncini to talk, but just a reminder, or at least sort of a notice, next week, American Public Works Association has a national public works sort of appreciation week, and we'll be looking to celebrate on a kind of a lower key kind of COVID scale within public works. We've historically honored this week by inviting 8th grade classes in to observe and see what public works is all about. Little do they know it's literally a recruitment session, but they don't know it at the time. But with any luck, they're out there doing great work around the country because of that 8th grade event. But with that said, we'll be doing something a little bit lower key in celebration of the employees in public works. So Melissa, are you ready and available?
I am. Thank you, Alan. Good afternoon, everyone, and congratulations, Jeff and David. Let's see. So we are busy in our recycling season. Here are just a couple pictures of our smaller events, the bulbs and batteries and styrofoam collection, which will help offset some of the demand on our sold out drop-off, swap-off day, or sorry, drop-off day, no swap-off for this weekend. And just a little quick sidebar, you can see one of our public works employees there carrying a couple bags of styrofoam. Styrofoam recycling prices are going to be increasing over the next year. I just got that bad news from our vendor, but there's not too many other options around to actually get styrofoam recycled. So we'll be going up from probably about $7 a bag to about $9 a bag after drop-off day. Next slide. In other news, we have started our household hazardous waste collection events last month in April. We had about 80 people attend that event, which was very well attended for Concord, and about over 600 people from all the member communities. So our next day will be this Saturday. And we have a new vendor, ACV Environmental, who have been doing a great job so far. Next slide. And residents have also been doing a great job bringing their invasives down to the compost site. We've already filled up one invasives bin, and we're well on our way to filling up the second one. It's been a pretty busy season so far down at the compost site with historic numbers. We've already had close to 6,000 people roll through over the last 2 months. Next slide, please. And in other big news, we are into our outreach for our curbside program. So the subscription period started at the beginning of April. And so we are hot and heavy and sending out postcards to those who haven't paid. And this week we have started sticking stickers on people's trash cans who have subsequently not paid. And next week they will get the friendly sticker. And we will leave their trash on the curb. So in general, we don't get more than a couple dozen of those by that point in time. But from the beginning of the outreach till now, we go down from about 500 people who haven't paid to now we might have, less than 100 this week. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Do we stop for any questions for Melissa if we want, Jim?
Yeah, are there any questions? I have one, Melissa. When people put out their recycling and they put out their paper products, when it's raining, is that okay, or is that an issue? Because it certainly adds the weight to the paper. And I think that costs us more, and it probably doesn't make I don't know if it makes the paper less recyclable or whatever. So that's my question.
That's a great question, Jim. It's an interesting question. So when we're talking paper, probably one of the biggest contamination issues is moisture. And so what we recommend is that when people put out their recycling bins and it's paper, and it's raining, be smart about it if you can, and lay a piece of cardboard over the top and put your commingled bin on top of it, just to help it not get super wet. Or if you can even hold off putting it out for a week, that'd be great. If it's light and sprinkling out, it's not a big deal. But if it's downpouring out, it is helpful, and it allows the paper to be recycled instead of ending up in the solid waste stream.
Good. If we could put something on the website that mentions that, I think that might be helpful. Then the question about the people who have not paid their subscription fees yet, who puts it? Does Waste Management put the notices on this bumps, or does someone from your staff do that?
At this stage, it is someone from Waste Management. We have a guy who's been working in town for over 20 years who actually really enjoys handing out little tags and stickers. So each day we download the report of who paid, and then they give it to the truck drivers in the morning, and they have a stack of stickers for us.
Thank you.
Can we sidebar about irrigation, Melissa, on this guy?
Right, he'd be the right guy, although we do need him to on the trash route.
Okay, great. All right, I'll go back to the presentations. Steve Dukran, are you available?
I am available.
All right.
And Your
there he
second question is, am I ready? I
Yeah.
wouldn't answer that.
Okay,
Good
are you
evening.
ready?
Yes, yeah. Good evening, commissioners. This photograph here is an area of a location where we've been developing a project for a crosswalk on Sudbury Road at the intersection of 7 Star, Oxbow, and Garfield. And we talked about the project before, we gave you details. It's a little bit more complicated than initially thought. It's involved putting in flashing beacons, portions of crosswalks, widening of the street on Sudbury on the east side, so as to improve the sight distance as you approach the intersection. We put the project out to bid, and we got bids last Friday. We got 2 bids. The low bid being around $140,000, and the second bid being $223,000. The initial funding for this project is from the Complete Streets Grant, an appropriation of only $20,000. Our estimate at the time of putting out the bid was about $99,000, which we thought we could make up using funds from other accounts like the road program account. Now that it's this much higher, we're still trying to figure out how we can proceed with getting this project done. So we haven't made a decision on that yet, so we don't have a schedule of the start date. Today at the Transportation Advisory Committee, I gave an update to the committee about where we are. Folks are disappointed, some members as well as members of the public who were in attendance, but we will continue to try and see if we can get this project done in the near future. Next, this is just the front page of the Hubbard Street reconstruction project, another complete street project. Discussed this in the past, improvements between Thorough Road and Walden Street. It's replacement of sidewalks, which are in deteriorated condition, put in new curbing, improvements to the drainage, that's been causing some flooding in the past years. as well as the project will involve reclaiming the street and repaving it curb to curb. Improvements to the crosswalks, especially down at the Walden Street side, put in bump outs to make sure they're safer than they are today. In conjunction with the Hubbard Street project, we're going to be bidding out improvements to the Stowe Street parking lot. So they're close to each other, and it was a good decision to bid them out together. We put out the bid today and expecting bids in a couple of weeks. Total project cost, I think we mentioned this the last time, is around $800,000 just for the Hubbard Street part of it. I also give an update on that to the Transmission Advisory Committee today. Let me just talk about two quick items on the Transmission Advisory Committee. The first one being a discussion about overall speed reduction in the town. We have been faced with issues coming from residents and others about speeding in several corridors, and a request of whether the town can do a speed reduction townwide. You all are familiar with the 25-mile-per-hour zoning for thickly settled denser neighborhoods and business districts. So people who are asking, can this be done townwide? And opinions have been sought, especially from town council. And the fact is, you just can't simply take a street, say like Old Marlborough Road, and which is the speed limits are set through statutory requirements, and change that to the 25 mile per hour. The state controls that process, and it involves doing an engineering speed study and presenting that to the state for approval. So the quick answer is no. It's the town doesn't have the authority to do a townwide change on speed limits. So I think we have the answer. It will take a considerable effort to make those changes if the town wants to pursue that effort. The other item discussed was the issue of a Junction Park, where there is a conflict between bicycles and pedestrians. And we do have the signs out there that people have to walk their bikes. People are just not doing that. So Alan and Aaron, they have been involved in coming up with a proposal to improve the signage by making bigger signs, making them more visible, as well as stenciling pavement markings as you approach Junction Park. Those will be implemented in, I guess, maybe the coming weeks. And hopefully that does help with the problem. At the same time, there are concerns about the extension of Bruce Freeman Rail Trail into Acton that will draw more traffic on the trail. So there's consideration for that. There are plans for doing traffic counts in terms of, number of bikes, number of pedestrians, number of skateboarders and so on, and then using that data to make changes as required. All right, moving on to the next slide quickly. This is a shot of the Cambridge Turnpike final paving on the what we call Area 4, which is down at the Crosby Pond location. So that was done, and the sidewalk was paved last week, so all the paving is done. Remaining out there would be the relocation of the Verizon lines. You see those poles that are out to the right side? Those are temporary poles, and the line up there, the active line, is Verizon that needs to go underground, and then those temporary poles removed. We're still trying to get Verizon to make a move on that. And this final slide of engineering has to do with our MS4 program. As a reminder, MS4 is our stormwater program, MS4 being municipal separate storm sewers as opposed to sanitary sewers or combined sewers where sewers carry both sanitary and storm flows. The town, like many other towns and cities, has a permit from the federal EPA as well as the state DEP. And we're required to perform what are called control measures. And one of them is doing public outreach and public education. And with the help of Melissa, this poster was created. And we are going to be using this poster at public events, the first one being at a drop-off event that's coming up. And if you look at it closely, you'll see all those QR codes. And you can actually use your camera, your cell phone, to scan them right on the screen. And it'll bring you right onto our website with more information. The first one will bring you onto the town's website, which talks about our stormwater management program. And the others two will launch you into different sites. The last one actually is pretty cool. If you scan that, it brings you to a video on the Think Blue Massachusetts, and that's a neat video. So we want to do this outreach, continue this outreach. It's a requirement of the permit. We have to report on this measure as well as other measures like street sweeping and catch basin cleaning to the EPA. And that's it for us.
Thank you, Steve. I have one question. Let me see here. Newport Construction was awarded both the 2020 and the 2021 roads program contract. Are we getting enough bidders every year, or I just want to just find out whether you're comfortable that we're getting enough competitive bids to do the programs?
Yes. So the 2020 was bid last year, and so Newport won it last year. It was later in the year, and we did not proceed because we had some issues with neighborhoods, and we had some utility work and all of that. So we deferred the work to this year. But that was a competitive bid, and that was a good price that we got. And it was just a few streets because the year was interrupted with the COVID issues and so on. This year, the 2021 bid was put out in a timely fashion in the winter, and we had 5 bidders, and the price was very good. It ranged from I think it's around 700,000 to almost $1 million. Our engineer's estimate was actually over $1 million, so we were pleasantly surprised that it came in that low. And it's a good price also because the second bidder was only $30,000 more. And we don't know if this is maybe something to do with asphalt pricing at the time, but we have since seen a trend, an uptick in overall construction costs. So we are worried that it could be
I just wanted to be sure that the town is comfortable that we're getting enough sufficient competitive bids, that we are in fact getting a good price. And just only because the same contractor won 2 years in a row, I asked this question. Thank you.
Okay.
I have a question also, Jim. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Go ahead, Casey.
Okay. Steve, thank you so much for the presentation. Just to go there one more time, the Cambridge Turnpike, a potential crossing at Hawthorne. Have you gotten any feedback from the neighbors, any additional feedback now that it's more open? I know we'll even get even busier, and perhaps people are talking about speed on that road. And also with the proximity to the town, I feel like that would be a good candidate for a crossing there.
Yes.
Maybe not as expensive too, as some of the other possibilities.
Yeah. Ever since that area was finally paved last year, we've had 3, possibly 4 people contact us about it. And so we, not being here when the decision was made, some years ago about not putting it in. We have been talking to the engineer and others about, why. The feedback we've been getting from the design engineer is that between their efforts as well as the town engineering staff at the time, that it was a crosswalk that couldn't be made safe. The director Alan and I have talked about this, and we think that we should continue to look at getting the crosswalk in there, making it as safe as possible.
Yeah,
And so we haven't given up on doing that.
that's good to hear. Thank you.
Yes.
I think you're good to go, Ellen.
Okay, so that Aaron McCloskey will talk on highway grounds cemetery. I'm gonna, he gave some slides and I added 1 or 2, so he's not surprised. I don't know if you can see them, but we're gonna be talking to start about this Sawmill Brook culvert failure over at Monument Street. And I've just been very pleased to see Public Works unite with our highway grounds on the sort of the emergency response, working very closely with the engineering division because of the sort of significance of this potential, failure on the road and traffic and gas and water services. Justin Richardson, specifically is the assistant town engineer, has been putting a lot of effort in, working closely with Aaron's team and even the water sewer crews helping out and support for, pretty much an emergency response that I think has been done, incredibly well to at least stabilize the situation. But I'm going to share a couple of slides before I turn it over to Aaron, so people can see, in essence, this. Can you see the this aerial photo here? I'll orient you where this is Monument Street. This is the Concord River. This is Hutchinson's Farm. And this area here is the fairly substantial kind of a wet zone. This is an image taken from aerial photography we have available to the town in April of 2021. If I go to a similar image back in March of 2020, what you can see is a line here. This is actually a channel that, when the culvert, which is located here, is functioning, drains as it should under Monument Street through this swale and eventually to the Concord River. And so I will turn it over to Aaron to sort of explain the difference between, then and now, and what we need to do to address that. But the culvert itself, when you can see it, this is the upstream channel and the downstream channel. And when you go, this is upstream here, this is downstream. And Aaron, if you can kind of take it from there as far as the response.
Yeah, absolutely. Good evening, everyone. My name is Aaron McCloskey. I'm the Highway and Ground Superintendent, Concord Public Works. So 2 weeks ago, after speaking with Steve and Dealey Kane Natural Resources, decided to try to breach a beaver dam that had flooded significant area. There you can see, I think we're upwards of plus 15 acres of flooded lands. So we attempted to mechanically remove the beaver dam with a contracted excavator, a large piece of equipment. We were at the site monitoring the flow. It appeared to be successful for the first few hours. We returned hourly to inspect the roadway and found after 4 hours that a sinkhole was starting to form just west of the roadway. Just in this photo, you can see just beyond that Jersey barricade. And what we attempted to do was to save the roadway. We immediately began to block the inlet where we thought the inlet was, where we were working. with large sandbags, 4x4 sandbags. 16 of those were placed in the pond. That slowed the water flow. What we didn't want to do was compromise and collapse the roadway. So we were successful in saving that. And then immediately began to try to excavate to find the inlet. That was unsuccessful. We went down about 15 feet as far as we felt comfortable without compromising the road before we decided to backfill the road, the side of the road, and install some temporary bypass pumping. So you can see here in this photo, there's 2 road plates on the inbound lane. That's CPW crews excavating the outbound lane. This is about, let's say, midnight on 2 Fridays ago, where we installed a 24-inch ID corrugated plastic pipe in this trench and essentially acted as a sleeve for 1 10-inch and 2 6-inch discharge hoses, where we set up large pumps on the side of the roadway. You can see here, there's a 10-inch pump. We are a member of NERAC, which is essentially a regional consortium of municipalities where NERAC provides emergency management assistance in the form of equipment and resources to municipalities at low or no cost. So we contacted them. We were able to get these 2 pumps, a 6-inch and an 8-inch, or excuse me, 6-inch and a 10-inch. We set those up along the road and were successful in sleeving and a discharge hosing underneath the roadway to try to pump down as much as we could the upstream pond that had been backed up by the beaver dam. So here you can see the outlet. This is the downstream side, the slope. You can see quite a steep slope here. 2 Concord Works employees connecting discharge hoses coming out of that 24-inch plastic corrugated pipe. And essentially the operation we started on Thursday, worked Thursday evening, Friday into Saturday morning to set this up. And then the following week as well. And we had at the height of the operation 3 pumps running. We were down to 2 pumps. We're down over a couple of feet now. This is the discharge. You can see there's quite a velocity and a lot of water, a high volume of water coming out. So we set up that's downstream. That's been essentially hoses going to another section of corrugated pipe to try to diffuse the velocity of the water coming out, tied down with some of the water-filled barricades that we have, and laying on a large tarp to try to minimize the amount of erosion we see downstream. So far, this is a current photo. If you were to go there tomorrow and take a look at it, there's a 10-inch and a 6-inch pump running as we try to pump down the beaver dam. So quite a significant effort, number of labor hours with our staff, working closely with contractors and some of our external resources again to get this thing set up. Also, I have to thank the CMLP Light Department. In the first photo that Alan showed, they were instrumental in assisting us with resetting a couple of poles. We had to relocate 2 utility poles that were in conflict with the operation. They also assisted us with deploying the intake. The intake section goes out probably 20-30 feet from the edge of the roadway, and their line trucks were able to help us and rig the hoses to drop them out far enough that we were able to get a adequate flow into the pumps. So thanks to CMLP for that. Also, Concord Police Department for supplying basically details around the clock for a number of days, and they are still assisting us with after-hour inspection of the area to make sure the pumps are running and nothing's blowing out on the side of the road. So.
Yeah, and I think, Aaron, to add to that, it's a work in progress. We've stabilized it. We're dewatering. The engineering division's working with Aaron on a potential solution. The solution is going to be hundreds of thousands of dollars. We know that. We're trying to figure out how best and how quickly we can respond. But so we have a mechanical means of draining that little sub watershed until we can get access to the actual culvert itself. We may do a temporary repair followed by a more permanent repair, but everything's going to happen probably within months. So it's kind of a fast track on this is what happens when infrastructure is you're not able to maintain it, or if there's catastrophic failure. It determines schedule, not so much you. So that said, engineering will be giving us updates on this as we go.
Also, April was a busy month for CPW and Highway and Grounds, besides the just Beaver Dam, the culvert situation. So we worked up at Alcott Field at the Alcott School, coordination with Concord Public Schools and the CCYB, CCYB group at their request to skin the baseball field that's up there. So CPW crews worked on this project over a couple of days to allow a greater amount of play up at that field. This was done mainly because of the shutdown that will be starting here soon at Emerson Fields. Those baseball fields will be offline for majority of the summer as we start the Emerson Field Improvement Project. So this is CPW crews came in, we skinned the field and brought in some new infield material to make that a more playable, usable field. We did have some high wind events last month. The next few photos are for some downed trees and responses for CPW crews. Trees keep us busy this time of year. Not only are we seeing, responding to weather events, emergency unplanned events, but also receiving quite a number of calls from residents wishing to have tree inspections done. They're seeing trees on their property that are either not leafing out in the springtime, or maybe were damaged over the winter that they're just now observing since they're out and about on their properties. So we are making a number of house calls to do tree assessments and working with residents to remove or maintain public shade trees. Also this month, last month in beginning of May, we planted over 40 public shade trees throughout town as part of our spring planting program. We'll actually be tomorrow at the townhouse and planting this year's Arbor Day tree at the 22 Monument Square, corner of Monument Square and Bedford Street. So that will be installed and in by tomorrow afternoon. So, also, rolling stock, we talk about equipment quite a bit. This is, not only do we ask for new equipment and get new equipment, which we appreciate, we also have some very skilled, a very skilled master mechanic and a very skilled fleet supervisor, and do the best we can with maintaining our existing equipment. So you can see here is a revolvable loader. There's a hydraulic coupler on the front end. The left-hand photo is kind of the pre-existing situation, and on the right you can see the new cylinder that was installed. So do a lot of work to maintain our equipment to the highest ability possible, so that we can extend the life and get the most use out of the equipment.
Okay, thanks, Aaron. Any questions for Aaron on the activities for highway grounds? Okay.
Yeah, Alan, I have a question. Sorry to interrupt. Just quickly on the Beaver Dam and the culvert. I think you answered one of the questions. So what we have is a temporary solution. We have to go back in. I assume you guys are up on grants. So I assume you know about the state small bridge and culvert replacement program. And is that something that we might be able to use, or do we need to act too quickly to take advantage of that?
I know we've, Steve Dukran, I don't know if you want to sort of weigh in. We did get an application. It was kind of low cost, but Steve, do you have a thought on, the grant process and how, and if that could possibly be leveraged?
Yeah, so we did get an application for a small culvert within one of the town properties, one of the forests. The criteria for these grants, you gotta replace the culvert in entirety, and you gotta make it wide enough for wildlife passage. So you end up with like a culvert this size, you might end up much like a small bridge.
Mm-hmm.
The culvert right now is 5 feet wide, but 3.5 feet tall. So when all is said and done, you're probably looking at a new culvert about 10 to 15 feet wide. The amount of money that comes in the grant is very small. I think your upward limit is like $200,000. So the investment from the town side will be much more significant than we are looking at right now for the repair. What we're looking right now, because there's a failure of the culvert right on the north edge of the roadway. So we're looking for replacement from that point to where the head wall is, about 30 feet into the property. So it wouldn't be a full replacement, it would be a partial replacement.
Okay.
So the grant is good for smaller projects.
Yep.
Not for the large ones.
Okay. And my other quick question, more educational purposes. So because this was in a wetland, how did we have to deal with Concom's on this? Is this like an emergency repair situation? And
So another, as Aaron pointed out, we work closely with police, we work closely with CMLP, and we work very closely with the NRC. Delia Kay, their director, was out there. I think she felt like part of the team.
Yeah.
She took the lead on all the, emergency permitting activities with DEP. Was there to see the activities that we were doing, the environmental protection measures that we were, considering through the way. So
Yep.
It really was a remarkable project in that, if I were a Concordian, I would have been pleased with the coordination of the different departments, and everybody seemed to know their role and, appreciate that it was an emergency and responded accordingly. So she has been the point person in the lead to sort of get those kind of permits in order.
great, it's good to hear that
Yeah.
the teamwork there. Thanks.
Mhm. Okay, so I think we'll go on to John Rogers on the,
I just have a quick question for
I'm
Aaron.
sorry, yeah,
Aaron is the tree warden, is that correct? Can you hear me?
yes.
Yes.
So Aaron is the tree warden, right? Yeah. Aaron, thank you for your presentation. I just had a quick question. I ran into something this week where you may or may not have guidelines for this, but a neighbor's fence, over the fence is a ton of limbs, like really, really overhanging the neighbor's yard. Is there a guideline for that? I mean, of course you want to go to your neighbor and say, is it okay if I trim them back? But is there any guideline for that? Is anybody aware?
So the town doesn't necessarily have a guideline specifically, but the best, when this comes up, because it does come up. So the town has no jurisdiction over private trees, essentially outside of the tree protection bylaw, which is triggered with new construction, demolition, over 250 square feet, I believe. But if it's branches that overhang one property line from the other, the tree ownership is wherever the tree is rooted. But if branches from one tree located at one property are overhanging onto a butter's property, the abutter can first contact the tree owner and ask them to trim them back. If they refuse to do so, then the abutter can then trim the branches that overhang back to their property line, as long as it doesn't endanger the health of the tree. That's typical advice that's given. I also follow that up with, I'm not a lawyer, and but that
You are
is
on the beaver patrol.
that's it. Yeah. So that's
very
the
good.
advice
Thank
we give. Yeah.
That's very
Anytime the two neighbors can try to work it out together is the best solution. But we do have situations where you might have a dead tree or a tree that's a hazard. It's on private property leaning over another property. In that situation, we as a tree warden still have no jurisdiction. I leave jurisdiction over public shade trees. And in that time, we'll do maybe an assessment of a tree, and I'll send an official certified letter to the tree owner, notifying them it's a hazard tree and what their responsibility would be if the tree were to come down, and the liability that's associated with that. So we'll essentially put people on notice, document it, that we've done that, and that's the extent of our involvement.
Thank you very much, Aaron. Appreciate it.
I'm
Okay.
sorry, I have to go. I have another commitment. My apologies, but I have to leave the meeting.
Okay,
Take
Good.
care.
thank you,
David, thank you.
Thank you, Aaron, and thank you, Alan, as always,
thank you.
and Jim.
So we'll go to John Rogers. We'll be wrapping up pretty quickly here. So John, if you can wrap up on water and sewer, that'd be great.
Sure, yeah. I do want to make just a couple quick remarks at the front end. We're going to be showing you a couple of the construction projects. I first should say good evening, everyone. Hopefully we'll get out of here pretty quickly with a brief wrap up of a couple of the capital projects we have going on. They're close to completion. So I'll talk to those, including the one on the screen. But I just do want to mention there's a tremendous amount of work being done, not only day to day on the operations side, the guys out there flushing hydrants and replacing hydrants and doing a lot of work. But the permits are up for service, new services to homes, And we have a lot of complex, larger projects that take some time. There are a lot of activities going on in the background that you won't necessarily be seeing on these few slides. But I'll quickly go through these major capital projects. We have really two going on right now. This is the Lowell Road pump station. We're also working on the West Concord or the Assabet pump station. The Assabet's just about complete. The Lowell Road, they're doing functional testing. I started that today, which is to make sure all the pumps are running the way we want them to, the control systems, et cetera. So that work is coming close to completion. We got lots of little details to fuss about and get done here, including some facelift on the building. I'm hoping that by the time we present another picture of this at your next meeting, the Lowell Road pump station will look a lot neater, prettier, better, and function a whole lot better than it has for this rehab project. So the next one, though, is really the big project, and the Nagog Pond intake. I'll try and keep away from all of the nuts and bolts, but just highlight a couple things. One of the things that won't show up in these photos are the beaver we talked about. We actually have received permission and trapped 3 beaver recently in the pond that would cause us some real concerns around water quality. For this as a drinking water source, they've been removed, and they were starting to dam up our spillway. Similar to what's going on over at Monument Street. So they're an ongoing concern. What you saw in the first picture was the barges, the 2 barges that are working with a crane sitting on it and another crane, and you see some pipe there wound around in the water. That's actually the airburst pipe, which has all been fused, and it's also floating out in the pond. If you go to the next slide, you can see the large diameter pipe, 16-inch diameter pipe in the fusing machine there. That is with 50-foot lengths are fused on site. And then the collars to the right are anchors that are collared around, and you can't really see here very well, but the small airburst pipe also fits through those. And then you go to the next slide and you'll see the pipeline floating in the pond, awaiting some final pieces of material and some work that we're doing to clean the remaining, the piece of intake pipe that we're going to leave in place, at least temporarily. We're doing some investigations and have determined to complete those investigations and get capacity for the pipe. We're cleaning the inside of that pipe, starting that on Monday. We've got an intake structure. Components are coming in. We're hoping as early as it might come in tomorrow, and start assembling that on the barge. And we need that intake structure, a little bit more work done. We've got the new compressor for the airburst system installed out there, getting the electrical, we're starting to look at that, getting that thing connected up. So a lot of activities to be taking place next week in particular. And then, hopefully it'll go very fast then and may get the pipeline with the intake structure installed the following week. And, we'll be then just buttoning up the contractor out there. And we've got oxygen coming in or liquid oxygen coming into the site that's used for treatment of the water, and getting that system dialed in, working with some potential alternatives to that system, which is required. As we mention all the time, as Alan mentioned in the rate hearing, we're highly regulated, and there's some things that we have to work with on the ozone system out there as well. And with all that, we're hoping to be up and running, within a month's time out there, sooner rather than later, because as Alan was talking about, the flow rates are increasing, due historically, and they are. In fact, the demand on the system is going up and up, and we need Nagog Pond to be a significant contributor to what we supply to the community. So with that, I'll see if you have any questions.
Great. Thank you, John. Are there any questions from the commissioners? Okay, thank you, Alan, and all of your leaders for the report. I think that was very thorough and gives us a lot of information. Last item on our agenda is are there any questions from commissioners or comments about the items today or things that you've heard from other residents? Okay, hearing none. Are there any citizen comments? I sense Terry Ackerman. Yes, go ahead, Terry.
Hi, I'm Terry Ackerman, 89 Eastbridge Road, member of the select board, but I just very quickly wanted to commend Alan, Melissa, and the whole team who stayed up so late last night, doing an excellent, excellent presentation at the public hearing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there other questions or comments? Rod? Yeah, go ahead. Rod, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. Rod Rydell, 324 Main Street. Alan, I had some technical difficulties. Did you give a PFAS update?
No, thank you for asking. It's buried in Fred's very quick update because we have, as you know, we have a requirement for sampling. We are in anticipation of detecting PFAS based on communities around us. And what we've learned is we're almost complete with our first round. The first round of sampling, we need to do quarterly sampling to get seasonal variability of PFAS in all of our sources. We've collected samples from all the groundwater supplies, and we've done a confirmation test on those groundwater supplies, all required in accordance to the DEP guidance. And what we've identified is, yes, there is PFAS in some of our groundwater wells. All of the detections to date have been below the drinking water standard. We have not sampled NAGOG yet because it's offline and can't. But what we do know is at this point, we are in good position. We were very encouraged. I will tell you all, I slept better, and I kid you not, when we got the results back. We have neighboring communities who are going through the same discovery we are, very similar to us, that are in very different situations. Most recently, Wellesley, I found out the water supply that I grew up with had the pond that I learned how to swim, had levels 4 times the state standard. They had to shut their largest supply down. They are fortunate they have an interconnection with MWRA and could use it and have. It has, introduced some complexities for Wellesley. Wayland is in the midst of a serious crisis where they're providing bottled water to their community to the tune of $25,000 a week as they try to look at emergency alternatives for levels that are just above the state drinking water standards. So the community is going through discovery with Concord. We're putting together information to put on our website once we get confirmation of all of our supplies. One of the supplies, Hugh Cargill, will be sampling on a monthly basis, where we identified somewhere in the order of about 10 parts per trillion. The drinking water standard in the state is 20. And so it's half the standard. But when you're talking about parts per trillion, it is nothing. There's so little margin for error, sample error, laboratory error, you name it. So we're cautiously optimistic with the first round, and it's inconclusive yet on NAGOG because we haven't done that sampling. But Rod, it's a great question. I know it was headline news because we do know that if there's an issue, we have to communicate it quickly. Once we get the data confirmed, we will post some information on our website so people can learn about this. But if you are paying attention to the news, you're kind of hearing it spattered around the Commonwealth, and it's only going to get worse over the next year. So good question. Thank you.
Thank you, Rod.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments from the audience, from the public? Okay, hearing none, I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Okay, now you can't do it by hands. I'm sorry.
I so move to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, thank you. On the motion to adjourn, we have a roll call vote. James Terry, aye. Andrew Boardman,
Aye.
Casey Winslow. You waved an aye. Jeff Vassar,
Aye.
thank you. My last meeting was the longest one that we've had in the year, almost 2.5 hours. Thank you, everybody. We will be back in June, just before town meeting.
Thank you all.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Right.